we are going to explore the ideas of a book called The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind by the Princeton psychologist, psychohistorian, and consciousness theorist Julian Jaynes. Let's begin. Metaphors and thoughts. As time passes, humans encounter new psychological experiences that need to be interpreted. Metaphors open doors in the space of our minds. In that space, we see the light of an idea for the first time thanks to a metaphor. Metaphors are part of the evolution of consciousness because they allow us to describe something that we can't put into words. We cannot think without using metaphors. Think about it. Language and its metaphors are the building blocks of the mind. When we use a metaphor, we use a term we already know to become aware of something that cannot be described in words. Now let's talk about language and metaphor. The most fascinating property of language is the ability to generate metaphors. Actually, language is full of metaphors. Or as Ian McGilchrist said, metaphorical thinking is fundamental to our understanding of the world. It is the only way understanding can go beyond the system of signs. It is what connects language to life. There are two parts of a metaphor: the metaphrand and the metaphyre. The metaphrand is the thing we want to discover, that what we see or feel but cannot be put into words. For example, we see snow on the ground, but there's something else about it, so we end up saying, "The earth is covered in a blanket of snow." The metaphyre is the thing or the relationship we use to illuminate what we want to discover or describe. For example, a blanket. The earth is covered in a blanket of snow. There is something about the word blanket that helped us discover and even feel what the person is trying to describe. A metaphor is always a familiar metaphyre operating in a less-known metaphrand. Language grows with each new metaphor. If I ask you, "What is that?" and there are no words to describe that because the experience is unique, you will respond, "Well, it's like," and you will use a metaphor to explain. As culture becomes more and more complex, metaphors work to generate new language. Just open a dictionary and look up the etymology of your favorite words, and you will see that this is true. We use metaphors from the human body to describe something else, like the head of a nail, the legs of a chair, the face of the mountain, the eye of the hurricane, the teeth of a comb, the tongue of the shoes, the arm of a chair. With metaphors, we can perceive and understand the inner and outer world, and we can even create new objects. Language is not just a way to communicate, it is an organ of perception. When we say someone has thick skin, we automatically understand what is meant, becoming aware of the abstract concept using the metaphor of the skin. We use metaphors to describe abstract concepts that we cannot physically see because these concepts only exist in the mind. Close that chapter. Opened a door I didn't want to open. The light bulb turned on. He lives in a dark world. The medicine world uses military metaphors when talking about body defenses or viruses attacking the body. Now let's talk about how language lives in an ocean of metaphors. Abstract words are ancestral coins whose concrete images have faded due to their frequent use in the busy give and take of speech. Most of our vocabulary consists of metaphors. This is not very apparent because metaphors seem to dissolve over time, allowing the word to exist on its own. The lexicon of language consists of a finite set of terms, and with metaphor can be stretched towards an infinite set of circumstances, thus creating new circumstances. So, could consciousness be a creation of this phenomenon? Now let's talk about how about understanding as metaphor? What happens when the mind wants to understand something? We use a metaphor for that thing we want to understand. With the metaphor, we replace what we do not understand with something a little more familiar. There is a feeling of familiarity, a feeling of understanding. So, how to understand consciousness? If to understand something, we have to use a recognized or familiar concept, then it is complex to understand what consciousness is. Or, as Julian Jaynes said, it is very apparent that there is and cannot be anything in our immediate experience that is like the same immediate experience. There is a sense that we will never understand consciousness in the same way we can understand things we are conscious of. The conscious and subjective mind is something analogous, as if it were a map, to the real world. That map is built in a lexical field whose terms are pure metaphors or analogues of observed behavior in the physical world. This is like a mathematical operation. This process is intimately linked to decisions and will. Let's take a pause here to define analog. An analog at every point is generated by that thing of which it is an analog of. For example, a map is created based on something already known. The relationship between an analog map and the Earth is a metaphor. Okay, let's continue. Consider the language we use to describe conscious processes. The group of words we use are vision-like. We see the solution to a problem. That person is bright. These metaphors and the mental space where they exist are a metaphor of real space. To create actions in this metaphorical mental space, we use metaphors of physical behavior. In that space within our minds, we can grasp a problem and see it from different points of view. The adjectives we use to describe a sensation of physical behavior in real space are taken analogically to describe mental behavior, like when we say our mind is quick or slow. I don't know about you, but I have to stop and listen to that with patience and attention just to understand it intellectually. But it's not until I feel it that I integrate it. I can feel the physical sensation of those actions or ideas going from one point to another in this mental space, and I can see it with the light of consciousness when I use metaphors. This space where these metaphorical activities occur has its own set of adjectives. We can be closed-minded or open-minded. We can be deep or superficial, and sometimes we cannot get something out of our head. Okay, so let's summarize the video. Summary. Metaphrand. The thing we want to discover. What we see that has no words. Example. We see snow on the ground. Metaphor. The thing or relationship we use to illuminate what we want to discover and describe. Example. A blanket. A metaphor works coming from a need to describe a particular aspect of a thing, or to describe something that has no words. That thing we need to describe, express, or lexically expand is the metaphrand, and for this operation, we use more familiar concepts called metaphors. By saying that this mental space is a metaphor of physical space, in this particular case, the external real world is the metaphor. But if the metaphor generates consciousness instead of just describing it, what is the metaphrand? Consciousness observing itself?